In the years leading up to World War II, the world was changing fast, and military technology had to keep up. Tanks played a key role in warfare, and by the time war broke out, it was clear that the United States needed a new kind of machine. Existing tanks were either too small or too slow. The United States needed something more versatile. Enter the M4 Sherman tank, a game-changer in modern warfare. The story of the Sherman tank begins in 1940, when the United States watched the battles in Europe and quickly realized that American forces needed a more capable tank. The British had already faced powerful German tanks and needed more support. Chief among the people involved in the Sherman's creation was the United States Army Ordnance Department. They were the brains behind developing new weapons. Another key figure was General George S. Patton, a man who knew the importance of fast-moving tanks on the battlefield. With the need for better tanks clear, the United States Army Ordnance Department went to work. The goal was simple: develop a tank that was reliable, powerful, and could be made in large numbers. Engineers began by looking at what worked well in existing tanks. They decided that the new design should have a medium weight to balance speed and armor protection. By the end of 1941, the first M4 Sherman tank was built. It weighed about 30 tons and had a cannon that could fire shells up to 75 millimeters. This made it a powerful opponent on the field. One of the coolest things about the Sherman was its engine. Most tanks at the time used engines more like what you find in an airplane, but the Sherman used a modified car engine. This meant it was easier to maintain and find parts for two very important things during wartime. However, designing the tank was just the beginning. Once the first tanks were made, they still had to be tested. Soldiers trained with it and gave feedback. While the Sherman was great in many ways, it had problems too. For instance, its armor wasn't as thick as some German tanks, and it could catch fire if hit in the wrong spot. But the engineers worked hard to fix these issues as best they could. By 1942, the Sherman was going into mass production. Factories across America started making them, and soon thousands were being sent to Europe and the Pacific. Tank crews quickly learned how to work together to cover the Sherman's weaknesses with tactics. Instead of going one-on-one with the biggest enemy tanks, Sherman crews would use numbers and teamwork to win battles. The Sherman tank mattered for a few big reasons. First, it was reliable and could be mass-produced, which meant that American and Allied forces always had enough. Second, it was adaptable and could be modified for different uses, like laying bridges or clearing mines. But most importantly, it helped turn the tide in World War II battles. Today we should care about the Sherman because it shows how technology and teamwork can combine to solve big problems. It reminds us that success often comes not from being the biggest or the strongest, but from being smart and working well with others. Plus, in a world that still relies on innovation and adaptability, the story of the Sherman tank is as relevant as ever. In the late 1930s, the world was getting pretty intense. Countries were picking sides, and no one wanted to be caught unprepared. When Germany invaded Poland in 1939, things kicked off into what we now call World War II. Countries like the United States and the United Kingdom teamed up to face the Axis powers, which included Germany, Italy, and Japan. Everyone knew that tanks would be a big part of this fight. Enter the Sherman tank. In 1941, the United States decided it needed a new tank that was tough, fast, and easy to build. The key people behind this project were military leaders and engineers who worked hard to figure out how to quickly produce a tank that could change the game. They landed on the medium tank M4, which everyone later called the Sherman tank. Named after a famous American Civil War general, the Sherman would soon become one of the most famous tanks in history. The story of the Sherman tank in World War II really began when the United States entered the war in December 1941 after the attack on Pearl Harbor. The military needed to ship tanks to nearly every battlefront, from North Africa to Europe. In 1942, the first Shermans started showing up on these battlegrounds. They were key players in campaigns such as the fight in the deserts of North Africa and the invasion of Normandy in France. Let's talk about how the Sherman worked. The tank had a 75mm gun, which was decent for the early years of the war. It could fire explosive shells and armor-piercing rounds, which made it pretty versatile. The Sherman's armor was strong, but not the toughest on the battlefield. One of its best features was its speed. It could drive fast over rough ground, which helped it support infantry soldiers and other tanks in battle. But it was far from perfect. The Sherman had its problems. Its armor, while decent, was no match for some of the heavier German tanks like the Panther and Tiger. Enemies often referred to it as a Ronson because it would catch fire if hit the wrong way. There was also the issue of coordinating so many tanks over vast distances. Crews faced communication difficulties, making it hard to work together smoothly during battle. Despite these challenges, the Sherman was built in huge numbers, about 50,000 by the end of the war. Its sheer number and the ease with which it could be repaired and improved made it a game-changer. The Sherman's presence on the battlefield meant that the Allies had the firepower and mobility they needed to push back against German advances. So why should we care about the Sherman tank today? Well, the Sherman is a great example of how innovation in tough times can lead to success. The teamwork between engineers, military leaders, and soldiers made it possible for the Allies to win key battles. It also shows how sometimes quantity and reliability can beat fancy, single-minded designs. Plus, it teaches us about problem solving. When the Sherman had issues, people quickly figured out ways to make it better, like improving its armor and upgrading its cannon. Understanding the Sherman tank helps us appreciate the impact of technology and teamwork in history. It's a reminder that even a basic design can be incredibly effective in shaping the course of events, leaving a lasting mark on the world we know today. In the early 1940s, the deserts of North Africa became a crucial battleground during World War II. This harsh landscape was where the Allies and the Axis powers fought hard to control the region. The North African campaign was vital because it opened the way to southern Europe and access to valuable resources. It was here that the Sherman tank faced some of its most challenging trials. Key players in this desert warfare included Erwin Rommel, a German general known as the Desert Fox, and Bernard Montgomery, a British general who led the Allies with determination. The Sherman tank, named after American Civil War General William Tecumseh Sherman, played a significant role in the hands of both British and American forces. The United States provided thousands of these tanks to the Allies, marking their presence in this pivotal battle. The story of the Sherman's impact in North Africa started simple, but grew complex. The Sherman was introduced to the desert during Operation Crusader in late 1941, a British mission to relieve the besieged city of Tobruk in Libya. As the campaign unfolded, the Sherman quickly became important, but it did not excel immediately. The desert's shifting sands and scorching heat presented unexpected problems. The Sherman tank was a medium-sized tank weighing about 30 tons. It featured a 75mm gun, which offered decent firepower against most enemy tanks of the time. But North Africa was unlike anything these machines had been built for. The heat could reach over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, which was tough on both the tank's metal and the soldiers inside. Sand got into engine parts, causing breakdowns. Keeping the tanks moving in these conditions was a massive task. Despite these challenges, the Sherman had some advantages. It was reliable and easy to repair compared to other tanks. It could cover a lot of ground quickly, which was a huge perk in the vast desert terrain. These features allowed Allied forces to adjust their strategies and gain an upper hand. Yet, the Sherman's armor was sometimes no match against the German Tiger and Panzer tanks. The Sherman's guns could not always penetrate the thicker armor of these formidable enemies. The engineers quickly adapted. They improved the cannon from 75 millimeters to a more powerful 76 millimeter version and added thicker armor, constantly trying to stay ahead in this deadly game. The tide began to turn at the Second Battle of El Alamein in late 1942. The Allies, boosted by fresh supplies and more Sherman tanks, launched a massive offensive against Rommel's forces. The battle was a turning point, leading to the retreat of Axis forces from Egypt. The ultimate success in North Africa opened the way for the Allied invasion of Sicily and later the Italian mainland, a key step towards eventual victory in Europe. Why does this matter today? This campaign showed the importance of adapting technology and tactics to meet real-world challenges. It was one of the first times that the mass production of machinery, like the Sherman tank, played a fundamental role in warfare. The lessons learned in the desert about flexibility, innovation, and persistence are still relevant to military strategies now. These desert battles helped shape the outcome of World War II and our modern world. The Sherman's role in North Africa is a reminder of how a combination of technology, teamwork, and timely decisions can shape history in profound ways. In the early 1940s, Europe was locked in the huge conflict of World War II. The Allies, including the United States, the United Kingdom, and the Soviet Union, were fighting against the powerful Axis forces led by Germany. This chapter is about how one of the most famous tanks, the Sherman, played a big part in the battles in Europe. Before the Sherman tank rolled onto the scene, the Allies needed something to help them compete against the well-equipped German army. These German forces had advanced tanks, like the Panzer, which were tough to defeat. By late 1941, the United States began producing the Sherman tank to give the Allies a better chance. Key people in this story include American engineers and military leaders. General George S. Patton, an American commander, was a big supporter of tanks in warfare. He believed that tanks could move fast and strike hard, giving the Allies an edge. Another important figure was British General Bernard Montgomery, who led many successful campaigns using Shermans. So, what actually happened? The Sherman first saw action in North Africa in 1942. It became clear that this new tank could make a difference. Built with a 75 millimeter gun, the Sherman was not the most powerful tank, but it was reliable and easy to fix. These tanks were mass-produced, which meant there were a lot of them. They filled battlefields in large numbers, making it tough for German tanks to compete. The Sherman tank was a game-changer because of how it was designed. It had medium armor, so it was protected, but also light enough to move quickly. Inside, a crew of 5 people worked together. The driver and the gunner were essential, keeping the tank moving and firing. The Sherman's track system allowed it to cross tough terrains like mud and snow, which was perfect for Europe's varied landscapes. However, the Sherman was not without its problems. Its armor was thinner than some of the German tanks, which made it vulnerable, especially to Germany's heavy Tiger and Panther tanks. The Sherman's gun sometimes struggled to penetrate the thick armor of these German tanks. Many Shermans were destroyed in battle, but their strength was in numbers and teamwork. Engineers worked hard to improve the tank over time, making newer versions with better guns and armor. The results of using the Sherman tank were huge for the Allies. They helped push German forces back in Europe from places like France to Germany itself. The tanks were key in successful operations like the D-Day landings on June 6, 1944, where the Allies stormed the beaches of Normandy. This marked the beginning of pushing German forces out of Western Europe. The Sherman matters today because it shows how technology and teamwork can make a real difference in tough situations. The tank was not the best individually, but when used in numbers and with well-planned strategies, it proved deadly effective. This teaches us about how solutions in wartime are often about making the best of what you have and working together to solve problems. In the end, the Sherman tank helped tip the balance in World War II. It was not perfect, but it did the job it was meant to do. Its story is an example of resilience and strategic thinking, and it reminds us of how innovation can shape history. In the early 1940s, World War II was raging on multiple continents. Military technology and tactics were rapidly evolving, and countries were scrambling to keep up. Tanks became a critical part of the battlefield, and this was when the Sherman tank really started to shine. But it wasn't perfect from the start. Key people in this story include the military leaders and engineers in the United States and the United Kingdom, who realized the need for a more robust tank. They were paying attention to reports from the battlefront. German tanks were powerful and heavily armored, and the Allies' tanks often struggled against them. The challenges seemed daunting, but solutions were in the works. The Sherman tank, officially called the medium tank M4, had initially been developed in the United States. The main goal was to produce a reliable, easy-to-maintain tank that could be manufactured in large numbers. The early models carried a 75mm gun, and they quickly became the primary tanks of many Allied armies. But as battles continued, it became clear that improvements were needed. As the war went on, German tanks like the Panther and Tiger had thicker armor and more powerful guns. The Sherman tank's 75mm gun often struggled to penetrate the armor of these enemy tanks. Recognizing these shortcomings, key players like the British and American engineers worked on upgrading the tank. One of the significant upgrades was fitting some Shermans with a more powerful 76mm gun, giving them better firepower against German tanks. Aside from the guns, other technical improvements were made. Engineers added extra armor plating to make the Shermans more resilient. The tank's suspension system was also improved, allowing it to maneuver better on rough terrain. These changes might seem small, but they made a big difference in the heat of battle. The challenges were many. The main problem was always balancing the need for a strong, well-armored tank with the ability to produce lots of them quickly. Each improvement had to be weighed against the time and resources it required. Another big issue was communication. The United States and United Kingdom had slightly different needs and ideas, and coordinating their efforts was not always smooth. The improvements made to the Sherman tank had huge impacts on the war. With better guns and armor, the upgraded Shermans were more effective against German tanks. They played a crucial role in major battles like those on the Western Front after D-Day. The increased production meant that thousands of Shermans were available, ensuring that the Allied forces could keep pressure on their enemies. So why should we care about this today? The story of the Sherman tank is a great example of how innovation comes from facing challenges head-on. It shows how teamwork and adapting to new obstacles can lead to success. Even today, engineers and inventors look back on the lessons learned from the Sherman and apply those teachings to modern technology. It's a reminder that with creativity and collaboration, we can overcome tough situations and keep pushing forward. In the early 1940s, during World War II, the world was in chaos. Countries were fighting for control, and new weapons were being built to gain an edge. One important player in this battle was the Sherman tank, used mainly by the United States and its allies, like the United Kingdom. While the equipment was crucial, it was the crew inside each tank that really made a difference. These soldiers had a tough job, but played a key role in the war effort. Each Sherman tank usually had a crew of 5. There was the commander, the guy in charge of leading and making decisions. Next was the gunner, who aimed and fired the tank's main gun. The driver made sure the tank moved smoothly over rough ground. There was also the loader, who had to quickly load shells into the gun. Finally, the co-driver helped with navigation and operated the machine gun. These guys had to work well together to handle the different challenges they faced inside the tank. Life in a Sherman tank was not easy. Imagine being crammed inside a hot, noisy, and smelly metal box with 4 other people. Space was tight, and everyone had a specific job to do. Communication was key. They only had headsets to talk to each other over the loud rumble of the engine and clanking treads on the move. Technically speaking, the Sherman tank was built to be reliable and relatively fast. It had a 75mm gun capable of firing different kinds of shells. This was important because they often had to switch between defeating enemy tanks and attacking enemy positions. The engine was powerful enough to get the tank moving at speeds up to about 24 miles per hour, which was pretty fast for a tank back then. But being quick didn't guarantee safety. Unfortunately, the Sherman tank wasn't the best at protection. Its armor wasn't as thick as some of the enemy tanks, which sometimes led to it being called a death trap. One major problem was that the ammo stored inside could catch fire if the tank was hit. This was a scary situation for the crew, who had to think on their feet and stay calm under pressure. The crews had to adapt to many different situations. They faced enemy fire, navigated tough terrain, and even dealt with mechanical breakdowns. Cold winters and hot summers also added to their discomfort. However, despite these challenges, crews learned to use their tanks effectively by working together like a well-oiled machine. The results of these efforts were mixed. While the Sherman tank had its flaws, it also helped the Allies push forward in Europe and the Pacific. Its numbers gave it an advantage. There were a lot of Shermans. Even though some enemy tanks were technically superior, having plenty of Shermans meant that they could often outnumber their opponents. Over 50,000 Shermans were built during the war, making them one of the most produced tanks in history. So, why should we care about this today? Well, understanding the life of a Sherman tank crew gives us insight into how ordinary people make extraordinary contributions during challenging times. It shows how teamwork, adaptability, and resilience can have an impact even in the worst circumstances. These stories remind us that whether it's 1943 or today, working together can lead to amazing things. The lessons learned from these crews help us appreciate what it takes to face and overcome challenges, both big and small. In 1942, the world was deep in the chaos of World War II. The Allies, a group of countries including the United States, United Kingdom, and the Soviet Union, were fighting against the Axis powers, led by Germany, Italy, and Japan. Things were not going well for the Allies. The conflict had spread across Europe, North Africa, and the Pacific. The Allies needed a way to turn the tide, and one of their secret weapons was the Sherman tank. The Sherman tank was an American invention. It was named after a famous Civil War general, William Tecumseh Sherman. The key people behind this tank included many American engineers and designers who worked hard to create something both effective and reliable for the battlefield. One of the most important was Joseph Colby, who focused on designing a tank that was fast, easy to repair, and could be mass-produced quickly. These qualities made the Sherman tank a great choice for the military. In the North African campaign, especially during the Battle of El Alamein in October 1942, the Sherman tank really showed its power. British General Bernard Montgomery led British troops equipped with these tanks against the German forces commanded by General Erwin Rommel. Rommel was famous for his clever tactics, and his forces were strong. But the Shermans had a few advantages that helped the British troops push back. The Sherman was not the most powerful tank in terms of armor or gun size. Its gun was 75 millimeters, which was smaller compared to some German tanks like the Panzer. However, the Sherman was fast and could maneuver well on the battlefield. It was also very reliable, meaning it broke down less than other tanks. This made it great for long battles and harsh conditions like the deserts of North Africa. However, using the Sherman tank was not without its problems. Sometimes the tanks would catch fire if hit, which made them risky for the crews inside. Soldiers even gave them the nickname Ronson after a popular lighter brand because they seemed to light up every time. Despite this, the American and British forces found ways to make the most of these tanks. They discovered that if they worked together and used good tactics, they could take on the stronger German tanks. The result of battles like El Alamein was that the Allies started to win more. These victories gave them hope and showed that the Axis forces could be defeated. By using the Sherman tank effectively, they managed to push the Axis powers out of North Africa. This was a big turning point in the war because it meant the Allies could move on to other important areas like Italy and eventually France. So why should we care about the Sherman tank today? Well, it is a great example of how technology and teamwork can change the course of history. The Sherman was not perfect, but it was good enough in the hands of the right people. It taught armies how to focus on what works and to use their strengths to overcome challenges. Learning about the Sherman tank teaches us that even when things look bad, smart thinking and collaboration can lead to success. Plus, it's a reminder of the incredible stories and efforts that helped shape the world we live in today. The Sherman tank, officially known as the medium tank M4, was a game-changer during World War II. It became a symbol of the Allies' strength and innovation. But what made the Sherman tank so important, and why does it still matter today? After World War I, many countries realized they needed new weapons for future conflicts. As tensions rose in the 1930s, world powers began preparing for another big war. When Germany started using fast, powerful tanks, the Allied nations knew they needed something strong and reliable to fight back. In the United States, engineers and military leaders took on this challenge. Influential figures like Brigadier General Jacob Devers and Major General Charles M. Wesson played a key role. They worked with a team at the Detroit Arsenal in Michigan to design a new kind of tank. Their goal was to create a vehicle that was not only effective, but also easy to produce in large numbers. By the end of 1941, the Sherman tank rolled off the assembly line. It was well equipped for its time, with a 75mm main gun that could fire various kinds of ammunition. Its armor was thick enough to provide decent protection without making the tank too slow. Weighing about 30 tons, the Sherman could reach speeds of around 25 miles per hour, thanks to its powerful engine. But the Sherman tank was not perfect. Its gun was not as powerful as those on some German tanks, and its armor could be penetrated by enemy fire at times. The tank crews faced many challenges on the battlefield. They had to find ways to work around these limitations, often using clever tactics and teamwork to get the upper hand. Despite these issues, the Sherman went on to become one of the most produced tanks during the war, with over 49,000 units made. It saw action in major battles across Europe and the Pacific, from the beaches of Normandy in 1944 to the islands of the Pacific Ocean. Its reliability and ease of repair made it a favorite among Allied troops. The impact of the Sherman tank was huge. It gave the Allies a much-needed advantage against the Axis powers, and its widespread use helped tip the scales in many battles. Its presence on the battlefield was a morale booster for Allied soldiers, who appreciated its support in fierce combat situations. So why does the Sherman tank matter today? For one, it represents the importance of innovation and adaptation during difficult times. The way the Sherman was designed and produced shows how cooperation and problem-solving can lead to success. It stands as a reminder of how technology and engineering played critical roles in winning World War II. Moreover, the legacy of the Sherman tank is visible in the design of modern armored vehicles. Many concepts, like mass production and versatile usage, still influence how tanks are made today. The lessons learned from using the Sherman continue to shape military strategies and technologies around the world. The Sherman tank is more than just a piece of history. It is a testament to the spirit of teamwork and resilience, showing us the power of human ingenuity in the face of great challenges. Whether through its technical achievements or its role in history, the Sherman has left a lasting mark that is felt even now.